my love for miracles of the imagination. One night, back in the 50s, when television was making its first big impact, my friend Ralph Allen, at the time editor of Maclean's, said to me, "We'd better all start learning to handle pictures and images. From now on, there'll be less and less reading of stories or anything else. In fact, we should be worrying about whether reading is on the way out." I simply couldn't believe this. We argued. I wasn't quite sure why I was so utterly positive I was right, and I remember that on the way home, I tried to figure it out, and now I think I did. I saw then that watching television and reading are two entirely different experiences. You can love one and hate the other. You can get so drugged by television that you can't take the time to read anything. Reading becomes an effort. Television is a spectator sport. What you are watching is all outside you and goes on even if for long stretches you are falling asleep. I watch a lot of television. I get comfortable in the chair, and half the time I'm daydreaming. I'm thinking of something else, half hypnotized, mentally inert, but comfortable, very comfortable. But reading, this vastly different experience, requires work from me. My inner eye comes to life. If it's a story I'm reading, the figures come to life on the screen of my own imagination. Language, just words, is making the miracle. The greatest wonder of humankind is probably the development of language, and the second wonder, growing out of the first one, is learning to read. Letting another man or woman who is maybe dead or maybe 10,000 miles away reach into one's imagination and create a vivid, moving world. A man sits alone with a book. The whole world around him grows silent. A voice so secret it can't be heard, just felt, is whispering to him and leading him deep into the world of the greatest wonder and power, his own imagination. To this day I remember the first long story I ever read. It was called The Fall of the House of Garth. I was 9 years old. The book was cheap pulp horror story. I forgot who gave it to me, but I'll never forget my rapt attention or how the figures were dancing around so wildly in my imagination. I had discovered reading and what it could do for the free, fresh imagination, and how it could enlarge the whole world of wonders. And as time passed, and as I grew much older, and though I read and read 1,000 works, I think I was always looking for some writer, some book that would give back to me the fresh imagination of a child. Ripeness is all. Freshness is all. How do you get this stuff? Where do you get it? And looking back and looking around at others, I can see that the person who keeps stimulating his or her imagination, stretching it like a rubber band through the visions of others coming through lovely reading, never grows old in the heart. I had a friend, a Russian Jew who had some serious optical problem. He wore glasses with very thick lenses. I asked him what had ruined his eyesight. He said that when he was a boy in Russia, his parents had been very poor. He had to work hard. His mother always got him to bed very early and turned out the light, but he would have a flashlight in the bed, and pulling the covers over his head, he would read by the flashlight. He read the stories of Chekhov, then book after book of Tolstoy before his eyes finally went on him. Looking back on it, he couldn't regret the damage to his eyes, he said. In his little tent under the covers, his beam of light had opened up new worlds, worlds he would walk in the rest of his life, worlds that put him far beyond his poverty-stricken home and made him aware of lives far different than his own. As this man knows, now that he is middle-aged, you don't have to have money or to go to college to find the magic of reading bringing new planets swinging into your ken. It happened in a big way for me, though, in my first year at college. Up to that time, I had been reading for fun all the boys' books, then Dumas and the Three Musketeers, and so on. And then one day, sitting in the Hart House Library, I picked up a short novel by a Russian I had heard of, Dostoevsky. The little book jarred me. I knew I was being forced to look at things in a new way. I had got my first taste of real writing. I was excited. I had to find other writers who had other upsetting visions. For me, they became the great writers. I remember being curled up on the couch in that library reading Flaubert's Madame Bovary. I should have been at a lecture, but I had to get to the end of the book. Yet I did not want the book to end. Well, Flaubert, in one of his letters to the great Russian Turgenev, said that there was nothing new for a writer to say. There had to be new ways of saying the old things. All my life I've had this in my mind as I've read and read. And when I find a writer who has his own way of saying things, I get excited. Another angle of life. Again, the new planet. I used to find that sometimes I was not in the mood for new things, and then I would read as I watched television, just relaxing. At one time, I read all of Agatha Christie and all of the tough mysteries of Raymond Chandler. I'll read any newspaper, too. The newspaper is in my blood. I have to know what's going on. But back in my mind always is the longing to read something that will not only stir me, but give back to me the unspoiled freshness of the imagination that I had as a child when I read The Fall of the House of Garth. The trouble is, I'm a professional writer, and even when I'm reading a good book now, my critical intelligence is getting too often in the way of my imagination. Another bad thing I have to guard against as I grow older is finding it easier to read nonfiction than fiction. A book like Barbara Tuchman's A Distant Mirror, about the European 14th century, can completely absorb me. I don't have to use my imagination at all. That worries me. Then I look around eagerly for good new story writers. I now know I have one simple rule for knowing if they're good. They're good if they make me want to write or excite my imagination. I know what it's like for a man who finally comes to realize that he has let his imagination wither and die and has grown old in the heart. He knows he is half dead. I saw it one night in a man I knew who was with me at a big party. He was a very successful executive and only 55. He was having trouble with his wife. Sitting on the stairs, he called, "Morley, sit with me. I want to tell you something." Holding my arm tight, he said desperately, "When I come home at night, I'm tired. The rat race. I eat, I have a drink, I pick up Time magazine. I read 3 pages and fall asleep." He had started to cry. Tears were running down his cheeks. "I know I'm a little drunk," he said, "but I used to read all the time. When I was at college, I was crazy about Catherine Mansfield and Virginia Woolf. I read Sherwood Anderson. What happened to me?" I often think of this man, particularly when I'm about to fall into a sweet little sleep watching television.